Zoe stepped into the sleek corporate office building, the familiar scent of polished wood and freshly brewed coffee enveloping her. The muted hum of conversations and the steady clicking of keyboards created a backdrop that was both comforting and invigorating. Today was a significant day. She had just received the news of her promotion, a testament to her hard work and dedication. A smile spread across her face as she thought of how her efforts were finally being recognized. "Hey, Maya," she called out, spotting her colleague in the bustling open-plan office. Maya was seated at her desk, her dark hair pulled back into a neat bun, her glasses perched low on her nose as she focused on her computer screen. At the sound of Zoe's voice, she looked up, her face breaking into a warm grin. "Zoe, what's with that smile? You look like you just won the lottery," Maya replied, leaning back in her chair and crossing her arms playfully. "I might as well have. I got promoted. I'm officially the team lead for the new project," Zoe exclaimed, her voice bubbling with excitement. If you're enjoying this video and want to see more content like this, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and activate the bell. That way, you won't miss any of our updates. Your support helps us bring you the best content possible. Continuing, Maya's expression shifted, a flicker of concern dancing in her eyes. "That's amazing, but you know Mr. Thompson, right? He's been less than supportive when it comes to your success." Zoe's heart sank at the mention of their boss. Mr. Thompson had a reputation for being dismissive and condescending, especially towards her. As a black woman in a predominantly white corporate environment, she had felt the sting of his prejudice more than once. However, she pushed those thoughts aside, choosing to focus on the moment. "I know, but I can handle him. This is a big step for me, and I won't let his attitude ruin it," she replied, her voice steady but laced with a hint of uncertainty. Maya nodded, though her brow furrowed with worry. "Just be careful. You know how he can get. If he makes any comments, don't hesitate to tell me. I'll back you up." "Thanks, Maya. It means a lot to have your support," Zoe said, appreciating her friend's loyalty. She took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of excitement and anxiety wash over her. The challenges ahead loomed large, but she was determined not to let them overshadow her achievement. As the morning progressed, Zoe prepared for the weekly staff meeting, her heart racing with anticipation and a tinge of dread. She could already envision Mr. Thompson's dismissive smirk whenever she spoke up. Taking a moment to collect her thoughts, she smoothed her blouse and straightened her posture. Today, she would assert herself more than ever. The boardroom was a stark contrast to the lively office floor, with its long table and austere decor. Zoe took her seat among her colleagues, exchanging polite nods and smiles. Mr. Thompson entered, his presence immediately commanding attention. He was a tall man with a booming voice, and his demeanor often left an air of tension in the room. "All right, team, let's get started," he announced, his eyes scanning the attendees. "I trust everyone has reviewed the project briefs I sent out?" Zoe felt her stomach churn slightly. She prepared to present her ideas, but as the meeting progressed, she quickly realized that Mr. Thompson was in one of his condescending moods. He dismissed the contributions of others, particularly Zoe's, with a wave of his hand. "Let's be real here, Zoe. You're still getting used to your new role, right? Your enthusiasm is admirable, but we all know the reality of the situation," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Pregnancy can be quite a distraction, and I just hope you won't let it interfere with your work ethic." The words hit Zoe like a punch to the gut. She felt heat rising to her cheeks, her heart pounding in response to the humiliation. "I assure you, Mr. Thompson, I am fully committed to maintaining my performance," she managed to reply, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "Committed? That's easy to say, but we need results, not just promises," he countered, his voice rising a notch as he leaned back in his chair, a self-satisfied smirk on his face. The eyes of her colleagues turned to her, some filled with sympathy, others with a hint of discomfort. Zoe could feel the collective tension in the room, but she held her ground, refusing to show weakness. After the meeting, Zoe stepped out of the boardroom, her mind racing with emotions. She couldn't shake off the sting of Mr. Thompson's words. The laughter of her colleagues faded into the background as she made her way to her desk, where Maya was waiting, concern etched on her face. "Zoe, are you okay?" Maya asked, her voice low and steady. He crossed a line back there. Zoe took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart. "I'm fine. Just frustrated," she admitted, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'll just have to prove him wrong." Maya's expression softened. "You shouldn't have to prove anything to him. None of this is your fault. You deserve respect, especially after all you've accomplished." "I know, but it's not that simple," Zoe replied, her voice tinged with sadness. "I just want to focus on my work and not let him get to me." "Maybe you should start documenting what he says. If he keeps making those kinds of comments, you'll have something to take to HR, Maya suggested, her brow furrowing in thought. Zoe looked at her friend, the idea taking root in her mind. "You really think that would help?" "Absolutely. If he thinks he can get away with it, he'll just keep pushing. You need to protect yourself. You're not just fighting for your position. You're fighting for your dignity," Maya urged, her voice firm. The weight of those words settled heavily on Zoe's shoulders. She had been so focused on handling Mr. Thompson's behavior on her own that she hadn't considered the power of documentation. The prospect of taking a stand, of not allowing his prejudice to define her, sparked a flicker of determination within her. "Okay, I'll think about it," Zoe replied, her resolve slowly building. "I just want to do my job without feeling like I have to watch my back all the time." Maya nodded, her expression supportive. "And you will. Just remember, you're not alone in this. I'm here for you, and I believe in you." Zoe smiled, grateful for her friend's unwavering loyalty. As she returned to her desk, she felt a surge of energy coursing through her. She would find a way to navigate this toxic environment, to stand up against the injustices she faced. It wouldn't be easy, but she was determined to reclaim her power and ensure that her voice was heard, not just for herself but for others who might be facing similar battles in silence. Zoe sat at her desk, the muted hum of the corporate office surrounding her as she prepared for the next phase of her quiet rebellion. The weight of her pregnancy pressed against her abdomen, a constant reminder of the life she was nurturing and the challenges that lay ahead. With a steady hand, she positioned her phone beneath the edge of her desk, angled just right to capture the conversations with Mr. Thompson without raising suspicion. Her heart raced with a mix of empowerment and anxiety. She was finally taking control of her narrative. As she adjusted the phone, Zoe recalled the sting of Mr. Thompson's words during the meeting earlier that week. His belittling remarks about her race and impending motherhood echoed in her mind like a haunting refrain. She had felt small and vulnerable then, but now, armed with her recordings, she was ready to reclaim her voice. "This ends now," she whispered under her breath, determination coursing through her veins. Moments later, Mr. Thompson strode into the office, his presence commanding and intimidating. He paused at Zoe's desk, his brow furrowed as he glanced at her. "Zoe," he said, his tone dripping with condescension, "I hope you're not planning to take maternity leave right after the promotion. We need you to be fully committed, not distracted by personal matters." Zoe felt her stomach churn at the implication. "I assure you, Mr. Thompson, my commitment to my work hasn't changed," she replied, striving for a calm demeanor. "I plan to maintain my responsibilities as best as I can." He smirked, dismissing her words with a wave of his hand. "Well, we'll see about that. Just remember, you're not the only one here who has to pull their weight," he said, his voice low and threatening. Zoe's heart raced, knowing that she had captured his disdainful tone. As he walked away, she felt a surge of adrenaline. She was one step closer to holding him accountable. In the days that followed, Zoe continued her recordings, each conversation revealing a deeper layer of Mr. Thompson's prejudice. She felt a sense of empowerment with each session, each snide remark meticulously documented. Yet, the anxiety of potential repercussions loomed over her like a dark cloud. What would happen if he discovered her secret? Would he retaliate? These questions plagued her, but the thought of remaining silent was far worse. One afternoon, Zoe was in the break room, filling a cup of coffee, when she overheard a conversation between two colleagues. They were discussing the upcoming company event and the recent promotions. "I can't believe Zoe got that promotion. She's going to be a mom soon. It just doesn't seem fair. Does it?" one of them said, and Zoe felt her heart sink. The other laughed. "I know, right? I just hope she doesn't take too much time off. We can't afford to lose anyone right now." Zoe's grip tightened around her coffee cup, her knuckles whitening. The casualness of their remarks felt like daggers, aimed directly at her. She hurried back to her desk, the sting of their words still fresh in her mind, fueling her resolve to gather more evidence. Later that week, Zoe received an email from Mr. Thompson, requesting a private meeting. Her stomach knotted with apprehension as she prepared for the encounter. She knew that this could either be a pivotal moment or a devastating blow. As she entered his office, Zoe straightened her back, reminding herself of the strength she had been cultivating. "Zoe, come in," Mr. Thompson said, his voice smooth yet laced with undertones of arrogance. "I wanted to discuss your performance and expectations moving forward." He leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled under his chin. "You do understand that your pregnancy could impact your work, right? I mean, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but it's crucial that you remain focused." Zoe took a deep breath, her heart pounding. "Mr. Thompson, I'm fully aware of my responsibilities. I intend to maintain high standards in my work, regardless of my personal circumstances," she replied, her voice steady. She could feel the tension in the air, thick and palpable. He leaned forward, his expression shifting to one of condescension. "Look, Zoe, I just don't want you to become a liability for the team. We need people who can perform at their best, and with a baby on the way, it's understandable if you're distracted." His tone suggested that he believed her pregnancy somehow diminished her capabilities, and it enraged her. "Mr. Thompson, my worth as an employee should not be determined by my status as a mother-to-be. I can assure you that I am more than capable of doing my job," Zoe asserted, her voice rising slightly with passion. She could feel the adrenaline coursing through her, empowering her to stand her ground. He waved his hand dismissively, a patronizing smile creeping onto his face. "Let's not get emotional, Zoe. Emotions have no place in the workplace. Just remember, I'm here to guide you, not to hinder you," he said, his tone dripping with faux concern. Zoe's frustration boiled beneath the surface, and she knew she had to tread carefully. "I appreciate your guidance, but I expect to be treated with respect. I am not just a pregnant woman. I am a dedicated employee," she replied, her voice firm. Mr. Thompson's expression hardened, and for a moment, silence enveloped the room. "You're not special, Zoe. There are plenty of people in line for promotions. Your pregnancy doesn't exempt you from the standards we uphold here." The bitterness of his words stung, but rather than retreating, Zoe felt a fire ignite within her. "I understand the standards and I will meet them, just as I always have. What I won't tolerate is being belittled for my personal choices. I demand respect," she declared, her voice unwavering. He scoffed, leaning back in his chair, clearly unfazed. "You'll learn, Zoe. This isn't just about you. We're a team, and the company comes first," he said, waving her off as if her words meant nothing. As she left the office, Zoe felt a whirlwind of emotions. On one hand, she was invigorated by her confrontation, but on the other, she feared the consequences of standing up to him. The recording she had captured felt like both a shield and a weapon, and she was determined to use them to protect herself. Back at her desk, she reviewed the footage of their conversation, noting the dismissive tone and the casual prejudice embedded in his words. Each recording was a testament to his discriminatory behavior, and with every playback, Zoe felt her resolve strengthen. She wouldn't let him silence her. She wouldn't be the burden he expected her to be. That night, as she returned home, Zoe shared the day's events with her partner, James. They sat on the couch, and she recounted the confrontation with Mr. Thompson, her voice filled with a mix of anger and determination. "I can't believe he thinks he can treat me like that," Zoe said, her hands gesturing animatedly. "I recorded everything. But what if he finds out? James took her hand, his eyes filled with understanding and support. You're doing the right thing, Zoe. You're standing up for yourself and your future. If he doesn't respect you, then you need to make sure he understands the consequences of his actions. But what if it backfires? What if he tries to turn it against me? Zoe's voice trembled slightly, revealing her underlying fears. He can't intimidate you if you have the evidence. You're not alone in this. We'll figure it out together, James assured her, squeezing her hand gently. You're strong, and you have every right to demand respect in your workplace. Zoe looked into his eyes, finding comfort in his unwavering support. With each passing day, she felt more empowered to fight back, not just for herself, but for her child as well. She was determined to create a better world for her baby, one where respect and equality were standard, not exceptions. As she drifted off to sleep that night, Zoe felt a renewed sense of purpose. She was no longer just a pregnant woman in a hostile environment. She was a warrior ready to fight for justice, armed with the truth and the strength of her own voice. Zoe sat at her desk, her fingers hovering over her laptop keyboard, as she replayed the recordings she had made of Mr. Thompson. Each audio clip was a painful reminder of the microaggressions and outright derogatory remarks he had hurled at her. The weight of his words pressed heavily on her chest, but she felt a twinge of empowerment with each playback. She could hear the disdain in his voice, the way it dripped with prejudice, and she knew it was time to strategize how to present this evidence to HR. Okay, Zoe, she whispered to herself. Taking a deep breath, you can do this. She opened a document to take notes on the specific incidents she wanted to highlight. The recordings were clear. They painted a picture of an unprofessional and toxic work environment. As she typed, she could feel her resolve solidifying. Just then, her phone buzzed beside her. It was a message from Maya. Asterisk, hey, how's it going? Have you thought more about talking to HR? Asterisk. Zoe glanced around the office, ensuring no one was watching. She quickly replied, Asterisk, I'm working on it. Just trying to figure out how to present everything. Asterisk. Maya's response was immediate. Asterisk, you've got this. Remember, you're not alone in this fight. Asterisk. Zoe smiled at her friend's unwavering support. She needed that reassurance now more than ever. As the clock ticked away, she made a mental note to talk to Maya later about her progress. With the recordings fresh in her mind, she decided to break down the key points of Mr. Thompson's behavior. The first incident that came to mind was during the staff meeting, where he had belittled her in front of their peers. She could almost hear his condescending tone as she typed, Asterisk, Zoe, I'm not sure how you think your little situation will work out here. Pregnant women can't be expected to pull their weight in the office. Asterisk. The words echoed painfully in her head, but she kept typing, determined to document every instance. As she immersed herself in the task, the door to the office opened, and James walked in, a warm smile lighting up his face. Hey, beautiful, he said, his voice a soothing balm to her frayed nerves. How's the day treating you? Zoe looked up, her heart swelling at the sight of him. It's been a day, James. I'm just trying to gather my thoughts about Mr. Thompson. He walked over to her desk, leaning down to kiss her forehead. I know you're dealing with a lot. Have you thought about what you want to say to HR? I'm working on it, she replied, her voice steadying as he sat beside her. I've been listening to the recordings, and it's worse than I thought. I can't believe how he talks to me. James frowned, his brow furrowing in concern. I'm sorry, Zoe. No one should have to endure that. But you're strong. You've got the evidence now. That's a big step. Yeah, but I just hope it's enough, she said, biting her lip. What if they don't believe me? What if he tries to twist the story? Then you fight back. You're not just an employee. You're a woman who deserves respect. You're going to be a mother soon, and you want to set an example for your child, he said, his voice firm. Zoe nodded, feeling a mix of gratitude and determination. You're right. I can't let him get away with this. I owe it to myself and my baby. As they spoke, Zoe felt her anxiety begin to dissipate. The support from James was a lifeline in her sea of uncertainty. Are you coming to that social event tonight? he asked, his tone casual but his gaze searching. I'm not sure. It's going to be awkward with him there, she admitted, her stomach twisting at the thought of facing Mr. Thompson in a social setting. James took her hand, squeezing it gently. You're strong, Zoe. If you decide to go, just remember you're not alone. I'll be right there with you. Zoe smiled again, feeling bolstered by his presence. Okay, I'll go. I need to show him that I'm not afraid. Later that evening, as Zoe prepared for the company's social event, she tried to shake off the nervous energy coursing through her. She selected a sleek black dress that hugged her baby bump perfectly and admired her reflection in the mirror. You look amazing, she whispered to herself. James walked into the room just as she was finishing up. His eyes widened with appreciation. Wow, you look stunning. That dress? It's perfect, he said, a genuine smile spreading across his face. Thanks. I figured I should at least look good while I'm standing up for myself, Zoe replied, her confidence bolstered by his compliment. As they arrived at the venue, a chic rooftop bar overlooking the city, Zoe felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The atmosphere was lively, filled with the chatter of coworkers and clinking glasses. But her heart raced as she spotted Mr. Thompson across the room, laughing with a group of executives. Just remember what we talked about, James whispered, leaning closer as they navigated through the crowd. You're here to own your space. Zoe nodded, taking a deep breath. She was determined to stay strong. As she mingled with her colleagues, she felt a sense of camaraderie that had been missing in the office. The laughter and lighthearted conversations reminded her that she was more than just a target for Mr. Thompson's prejudice. However, the evening took a turn when Mr. Thompson approached the group. Ah, Zoe, there you are, he said, his tone dripping with false charm. I was just telling everyone how your absence from work is going to be a real challenge for us. I mean, pregnant women can't do much in terms of productivity, right? Laughter erupted from the group, and Zoe felt the heat rise in her cheeks. The humiliation clawed at her insides, but she held her ground. That's not true, Mr. Thompson. I've been working hard, and I intend to continue doing so, she replied, her voice steady. He smirked, leaning closer as if sharing a secret. Oh, come on. I'm just kidding, Zoe. Lighten up a bit. It's just a joke, he said, but the condescension in his voice was palpable. Zoe clenched her fists, her resolve hardening. I don't find it funny, sir. Making jokes at the expense of someone's circumstances is not professional. The laughter around them faded, and the group began to shift uncomfortably. James stepped forward, positioning himself protectively beside Zoe. She deserves respect, Mr. Thompson. This isn't a joke. It's her life. Mr. Thompson's expression darkened, but Zoe met his gaze head-on. She felt a surge of strength, fueled by the support of her partner and the knowledge that she was standing up for herself. Maybe it's time for you to reconsider your approach, Mr. Thompson, she said, her voice unwavering. As the tension hung in the air, Zoe realized that this moment was a turning point. She had finally found her voice, and she wasn't going to let anyone silence her anymore. The laughter and chatter resumed around them, but Zoe felt a sense of clarity wash over her. She was ready to take action. Later that night, as she and James drove home, the adrenaline still coursed through her. I can't believe I stood up to him, Zoe said, her voice filled with disbelief. James smiled at her, pride evident in his eyes. You were incredible, Zoe. I knew you had it in you. I just have to keep this momentum going, she said, her mind racing. I need to take this to HR. I can't let him get away with this anymore. You're ready, he said, his voice warm and reassuring. And I'll be right by your side, every step of the way. As they pulled into their driveway, Zoe felt a sense of hope bloom within her. With James by her side and the recordings in her possession, she was ready to fight for herself and the future she wanted to create for her child. Zoe sat in the small, sterile office of the Human Resources Department, her heart pounding in her chest. The faint hum of fluorescent lights flickered above her, creating an atmosphere that felt both clinical and suffocating. Across from her sat Sarah, a seasoned HR representative known for her compassion and dedication. Zoe had always appreciated Sarah's approach to employee concerns, but today, the urgency of her situation made every second feel like an eternity. "Zoe," Sarah said softly, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern as she noticed the tension in Zoe's posture. "You mentioned you had something important to discuss. I'm here to listen." Zoe took a deep breath, summoning the courage she had been building over the past weeks. "I have recordings," she began, her voice steady but low. "Recordings of Mr. Thompson's comments. He's been discriminatory. And it's not just a one-time thing." Sarah's eyebrows raised in surprise, and she leaned forward, her interest piqued. "Recordings? That's significant. Can you show me?" With trembling hands, Zoe retrieved her phone from her bag. She had prepared for this moment, knowing that the evidence she had collected was crucial. As she navigated to the app where her recordings were stored, she felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation. This was it, the moment she would expose the truth. As Zoe played the first recording, the room filled with the voice of Mr. Thompson, his condescending tone unmistakable. "You're going to have a tough time balancing work and motherhood, Zoe. I just hope you don't become a liability to this team," he sneered. Zoe's stomach churned at the memory of that day, but she kept her focus on Sarah. The HR representative's eyes widened as the recording continued, revealing more of Thompson's insidious remarks. The discomfort on Sarah's face grew with each passing second, a clear indication of the shock she was experiencing. "Zoe, I'm horrified," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper as the recording ended. "I had no idea he was behaving this way. We need to take this seriously." Zoe nodded, relief washing over her. "I didn't want to believe it at first, but it's been escalating. I thought if I documented it, I could protect myself." "You've done the right thing," Sarah affirmed, her professional demeanor returning. "I will initiate an investigation immediately. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. It's crucial we address this behavior before it escalates further." As they spoke, Zoe felt a surge of empowerment. For the first time, she was not just a victim of her circumstances. She was taking action. "I want to see this through," she declared, her determination igniting. "I want to make sure he knows he can't treat me or anyone else like this." Sarah smiled, impressed by Zoe's resolve. "Good. I'll set up a meeting with the higher-ups and ensure that we handle this discreetly. You have my word that we will protect your confidentiality." As Zoe left the HR office, a newfound sense of hope filled her. She had taken the first step toward reclaiming her dignity, and it felt liberating. However, she knew the road ahead could still be treacherous. Mr. Thompson was not the type to back down easily. Days passed, and with each moment, the tension in the office grew palpable. Zoe sensed that something was amiss. Mr. Thompson had become more erratic, his gaze sharper, his comments increasingly pointed. It was as if he could feel the shift in the air, an instinctual knowledge that his time was running out. During one particularly tense afternoon, Zoe found herself cornered in the break room by Mr. Thompson. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, and a smug expression on his face. "You've been awfully quiet lately, Zoe. I hope you're not planning to make any complaints." "That would be unwise," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. Zoe met his gaze, refusing to look away. "I'm just focusing on my work, Mr. Thompson. I have nothing to complain about if you treat me with respect," she replied, her voice firm. His smile faded, replaced by a scowl. "Respect? You think you deserve respect just because you're pregnant? You're a liability and you know it. I suggest you remember your place," he hissed, his words laced with venom. Zoe felt her heart race, but she stood her ground. "I deserve to be treated with dignity, just like everyone else in this office. Your behavior is unacceptable, and you will be held accountable." With that, she turned on her heel, leaving him standing there, fuming. Zoe was aware that she was playing a dangerous game, but the fire inside her burned brighter than her fear. She was not going to let him intimidate her any longer. That evening, feeling isolated but resolute, Zoe attended a support group for women facing workplace discrimination. The small room was filled with a diverse group of women, each with their own stories of struggle and resilience. As the facilitator introduced the session, Zoe felt a sense of camaraderie wash over her. "Thank you all for being here. We know that workplace discrimination can be incredibly isolating," the facilitator began. "Tonight, we're going to share our experiences and support each other in navigating these challenges." Zoe listened intently as women spoke about their own encounters with bias and discrimination. One woman shared a story of being overlooked for a promotion despite her qualifications, while another recounted how her manager dismissed her ideas in meetings. Each tale resonated deeply with Zoe, and she felt a sense of belonging in this space. When it was Zoe's turn to speak, she took a deep breath, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I'm currently dealing with a situation at work where my boss is making discriminatory remarks about my pregnancy and my race. It's been really difficult, and I've started recording his comments to gather evidence." Gasps of empathy filled the room, and Zoe noticed nods of understanding. "You're so brave for taking that step," one woman said, her eyes shining with admiration. "It's not easy to stand up against someone in power." Zoe felt a wave of support wash over her, the weight of her loneliness beginning to lift. "Thank you. It helps to know I'm not alone in this. I'm determined to fight back, but it's hard to stay strong sometimes." Another woman, a seasoned professional who had faced her own battles, leaned in. "You need to remember that your voice matters. What you're doing is important not just for you, but for others who may be too scared to speak up. You're paving the way for change." Zoe's heart swelled with gratitude. In that moment, she realized that she was part of a larger movement, a collective of women who refused to be silenced. Their stories fueled her resolve, and she left the meeting that night feeling more empowered than ever. As she headed home, thoughts of her upcoming confrontation with Mr. Thompson loomed large. She knew that the investigation was underway, and soon the truth would be revealed. But she also understood that the battle was far from over. She felt a renewed sense of responsibility, not only for herself but for all the women who had come before her and those who would come after. Zoe was ready to fight, and she would not back down. As Zoe sat in her small cubicle, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead, she felt a mix of anxiety and determination pulsing through her veins. The ongoing investigation had revealed shocking evidence against Mr. Thompson, and while she had expected it, the reality felt surreal. Her heart raced as she recalled the countless instances of his racist remarks and belittling comments, all captured meticulously in her recordings. She was no longer just a victim. She was a warrior ready to confront her oppressor. "Zoe, are you okay?" Maya's voice broke through her thoughts. She turned to see her friend leaning against the partition, concern etched on her face. "I'm just thinking," Zoe replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "It's all so overwhelming." Maya stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Have you heard anything from HR? What's the next step?" Taking a deep breath, Zoe shook her head. "Not yet, but I know they're taking this seriously. They have to. I want to make sure I'm ready for whatever comes next." Maya's eyes softened. "You've got this, Zoe. Just remember, you're not alone in this fight. I'm here for you." Zoe nodded, grateful for Maya's support. They had formed a bond thicker than the usual office camaraderie, a sisterhood forged in the fires of adversity. As the minutes ticked by, an unease settled in the pit of her stomach. She had heard whispers among her colleagues, murmurs of uncertainty and gossip, but none could prepare her for the confrontation she felt looming on the horizon. Later that afternoon, Zoe received an unexpected email from HR. They wanted to meet with her to discuss the findings of the investigation. The time was set for the following day, and as she read the message, a sense of dread washed over her. What if Mr. Thompson had already begun to spin his narrative, discrediting her character to protect himself? She glanced at her phone, her heart racing as she saw a new notification. It was a message from an unknown number. Curiosity mixed with apprehension as she opened it. The text read, "You'd better back off, Zoe. This isn't a game. You don't know what you're getting yourself into." Her blood ran cold. The threat was unmistakable. Mr. Thompson was trying to intimidate her, to silence her before she could expose his true nature. But Zoe felt a spark ignite inside her, a fierce defiance. She would not be bullied into submission. "Zoe," Maya's voice pulled her from her thoughts. "You look pale. What's wrong?" It's nothing," Zoe lied, shaking her head. But deep down, she knew she had to prepare herself for the battle ahead. That evening, she sat at her dining table, the dim light casting shadows across the room as she reviewed her recordings once more. Each audio clip was a testament to her experience, her strength, and the blatant discrimination she had faced. As she listened, she could feel her resolve hardening. Each derogatory comment Mr. Thompson had made was not just an attack on her, but an affront to all women and people of color who had suffered in silence. Tomorrow, she whispered to herself, "I will confront him. He needs to be held accountable." The following morning, Zoe arrived at the office with purpose. The air felt charged as she made her way to the conference room where the meeting with HR was scheduled. As she walked, she noticed Mr. Thompson at the far end of the hallway, his expression unreadable. For a moment, their eyes met, and she felt a shiver run down her spine. But she stood tall, unwilling to show any sign of weakness. Inside the conference room, Zoe found herself facing Sarah, the HR representative she had confided in, along with two other members of the HR team. They greeted her with warm smiles, but Zoe could sense the seriousness of the situation. "Thank you for coming, Zoe," Sarah began. "We've conducted a thorough investigation based on your recordings and the accounts of other employees." Zoe's heart raced, and the HR representative exchanged glances with her colleagues before continuing. "We've found substantial evidence of inappropriate behavior, and we're taking this matter very seriously. However, Mr. Thompson has already begun to discredit your character to the higher-ups, claiming that you are exaggerating and that your recordings were taken out of context." Zoe's stomach churned at the thought. "He's lying. I have proof of everything he's said." "We believe you," Sarah reassured her, "but we need to present a united front. If he tries to undermine your credibility, we have to be ready to counter it." Zoe took a deep breath, steeling her resolve. "I'm ready for whatever it takes. I won't let him silence me." As they discussed the next steps, Zoe's mind began to race with strategies. She envisioned the confrontation that awaited her. She could see herself standing before her colleagues, her voice unwavering as she shared her truth. In that moment, she felt a sense of empowerment wash over her. That afternoon, the time had come. Zoe gathered her recordings and notes, her heart pounding as she made her way to the meeting room where Mr. Thompson would be present. The atmosphere was thick with tension as she entered, a mixture of curiosity and apprehension hanging in the air. Mr. Thompson sat at the head of the table, his expression smug as he scanned the room. "Ah, Zoe, I hope you've reconsidered your position. This is all quite unnecessary, don't you think?" Zoe clenched her fists, refusing to let him rattle her. "I'm here to speak the truth, Mr. Thompson." As the meeting commenced, Zoe felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She listened as he attempted to downplay the investigation, weaving his narrative with practiced ease. But when it was her turn to speak, she stood tall, her voice steady. "Mr. Thompson, I have recordings that capture your exact words. I have proof of your discriminatory behavior, and I will not allow you to twist the truth any longer." The room fell silent, and Zoe could see the flicker of surprise on Mr. Thompson's face. "You wouldn't dare," he scoffed, but there was a tremor in his voice. "I already have," she replied, pulling out her phone and preparing to play the recordings. The atmosphere shifted as Zoe pressed play, her heart racing as the sound of Mr. Thompson's derogatory comments filled the room. She watched as his expression went from smug confidence to disbelief, the color draining from his face as his own words turned against him. "I refuse to be intimidated or silenced," Zoe declared, her voice strong and unwavering. "What you've done is unacceptable, and I will stand my ground." In that moment, Zoe knew she was not just fighting for herself but for every woman and person of color who had faced similar discrimination. She was reclaiming her power, and she would not back down. The atmosphere in the conference room was thick with tension as Zoe stood before her colleagues, her hands trembling slightly as she prepared to play the recordings. Mr. Thompson, seated at the head of the table, exuded an air of confidence that now felt absurdly misplaced. His usual bravado had faltered, and for the first time, Zoe could see the cracks in his facade. The rest of the team, their eyes darting between her and their boss, were acutely aware that something monumental was about to unfold. Zoe pressed the play button on her phone, the small speaker crackling to life. The first recording echoed in the room, capturing Mr. Thompson's voice in a condescending tone. "You know, Zoe, I just don't think a woman with a baby can keep up with the demands of this job. It might be too much for you." A gasp rippled through the room. Zoe's heart raced. She continued to watch Mr. Thompson's face transform from arrogance to shock, his skin paling as his own words hung in the air, an indictment against his character. The next recording played, and Zoe felt a wave of empowerment wash over her. "Honestly, I'm worried that your pregnancy will just be a distraction. We can't afford any more distractions in this office." The disdain in his tone was palpable, and she felt the weight of her colleagues' stares, their expressions shifting from shock to anger. "Is this really how you treat your employees?" Zoe asked, her voice steady and strong, a stark contrast to the vulnerability she'd felt in previous encounters. "This isn't just about me. It's about everyone who has been subjected to your discrimination." Mr. Thompson opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He looked around the room, desperate for support, but the silence that followed felt like a tidal wave crashing over him. Zoe could see the disbelief in her colleagues' eyes, many of whom she knew had witnessed Mr. Thompson's behavior but had been too afraid to speak up. "Zoe, you're making a big mistake," he finally managed to stammer, attempting to regain control of the situation. "This is just a misunderstanding. Surely you can see that." "No, Mr. Thompson," Zoe replied, her voice unwavering. "This is not a misunderstanding. This is a pattern of behavior that has gone unchecked for far too long." As the recordings continued, details of his blatant racism and sexism spilled forth, revealing a litany of offenses that no one in the room had been aware of. Each playback drew more gasps, more expressions of disbelief and indignation. Zoe felt a surge of energy. It was exhilarating to see others awakening to the reality of her situation. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the recordings ended. The room was silent, the weight of what had just transpired hanging heavily in the air. Zoe glanced around, meeting the eyes of her colleagues, who now looked at her with a mixture of admiration and newfound respect. Mr. Thompson, Sarah, the HR representative, spoke up, her voice firm and resolute. "We need to take immediate action. Your behavior is unacceptable and will not be tolerated." Zoe's heart swelled with pride as she felt the support of her colleagues behind her. She had not just fought for herself, but for everyone who had suffered in silence. The fallout was swift. Mr. Thompson was led out of the room, his face a mask of fury and humiliation. Zoe could almost feel the weight of his anger, but it was no longer directed at her. It was an anger born of realization, of having been exposed in front of those he had ruled over with an iron fist for far too long. As he left, a wave of applause erupted from the team. "You did it, Zoe," Maya exclaimed, rushing to her side, her eyes shining with pride. "You were incredible." "Thank you," Zoe replied, her voice thick with emotion. "I couldn't have done it without you all." The atmosphere in the room shifted from one of tension to celebration. Colleagues came forward to express their support, sharing their own stories of discrimination and how they had felt powerless to act. Zoe realized that her courage had ignited a spark in others, a realization that they, too, could stand up against injustice. In the days that followed, HR committed to a comprehensive investigation into the workplace culture, promising to foster a more inclusive environment. Zoe was appointed as a representative to help guide these changes, her voice now a vital part of the conversation. One afternoon, as she sat in a meeting discussing new policies with HR, Zoe received a message that made her heart race. It was from James. "I heard what happened. I'm so proud of you. Can't wait to celebrate tonight." Zoe smiled, a warmth spreading through her chest. She texted back, "Can't wait to see you. I feel like everything is finally changing." That evening, as Zoe left the office with Maya and James, she felt lighter than she had in months. The weight of the toxic environment had lifted, replaced by a sense of hope and renewed purpose. As they walked down the street, the sun setting in vibrant colors above them, Zoe couldn't help but feel that she was on the brink of a new chapter in her life. Not just as a mother-to-be, but as a woman who had fought for her rights and the rights of others. "Maya, do you think we can really change things?" Zoe asked as they strolled together, her mind racing with possibilities. "Absolutely," Maya replied. "You've already proven that. You standing up has given others the courage to speak out as well." "This is just the beginning." James nodded in agreement. "And think about your baby, Zoe. You're setting an example for the next generation, showing that it's important to fight for what's right." Zoe felt a surge of determination. She would not only be a mother, but also a changemaker, someone who could help reshape the narrative around workplace discrimination. As the three of them continued walking, Zoe envisioned a future where her child would grow up in a world that valued equality and respect, a world that embraced diversity rather than shunned it. The journey ahead would not be easy, but with her newfound strength and the support of her friends, she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. With a heart full of hope and determination, Zoe stepped into the future, ready to embrace motherhood and the fight for justice with open arms. If you like the content, don't forget to leave a like, a comment, and share it with your friends. Your comment is essential for the growth of the channel. And look at this video that appears on the screen. See you soon.